Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you're all having a good week. Coming to the end of week 10 for Foundations. And every Sunday, what I like to do is go over my best of one meta breakers, which are off meta picks that were successfully piloted to Mythic with at least a 60% win rate and at least 50 matches. At least close to 50 matches. And so the reason why I like to do this is because you can always jam mono red to Mythic, and that's a certain vibe. But there's a lot of decks in Standard that are quite viable. Right now we have a very diverse meta. The meta is definitely not dominated by a single deck in either best of one or best of three, which is always nice to see, because I have played in Standard when there was one competitive deck throughout the years, especially since Portal in '97. So, what I'm going to focus this on best of one, though. So a lot of these will have sideboards because they're usually pulled from a best of three list. So I will let you peruse the best of three sideboard on your own time, and we'll just kind of quickly go over the strategy in case you're new or returning to Magic, haven't seen the deck before. So this one's Simic Crabs. Again, this one is done in no order. Specifically, I just picked them out throughout the weeks on Untapped, which is a third-party tracker. So this one was Simic Crabs by Berserk Bandicoot. And it's also kind of a fun way to give a shout out to somebody who had a nice successful climb to Mythic. So they went 38 and 19 for a 67% win rate. Not really taking any unique approaches on this archetype. This looks like a pretty standard list in my opinion. You've got Up the Beanstalk, which then allows you to draw off of your Crab, your Tolarian Terror, and the discounted This Town Ain't Big Enough. And they chose to use the Into the Floodmaw instead of Unsummon. Some lists will run Unsummon so that you can bounce your own Crab or your own Terror from your opponent's interaction or board wipes. But you're trying to turbo mill. You're trying to use Cash Grab and Seed of Hope to get as many cards into your graveyard early so that you can get a very discounted Tolarian Terror and Eddie Merc Crab. And then with the Eddie Merc Crabs, you can just tap your opponent and tempo them out. We've got Storm Chaser's Talent in here, which allows you to re-loop the This Town Ain't Big Enough. So on 4, you can return the This Town Ain't Big Enough, then use This Town Ain't Big Enough to bounce Storm Chaser's Talent and one other thing, which gives you some longer interaction if the game goes that long. Bushwhack is the only interaction really outside of the bounce with Into the Floodmaw. And then Analyze the Pollen can also use your graveyard to go find a specific card. And then 3 steps ahead as one counter spell. This, I guess, would be the one card that you can kind of see move around into different options in other builds. Next up, we have Esper Control by Shimbel, went 63 and 36 for a 64% win rate. And this is a different take on, so there's the Esper Bounce deck, or the Esper Self-Bounce deck. This one is not running it's not running the Fear of Isolation. It is running 2 copies of the Nurturing Pixie, but not 4. But really, the point of this deck is focused on Temporary Lockdown and doing loops through Temporary Lockdown. So if you have a whole bunch of stuff that has interesting ETBs that cost 2 or less, then when you play a Temporary Lockdown, you wipe your own stuff. But then when you bounce the Temporary Lockdown, you get the ETBs come back in and trigger all over again. So you can kind of wipe your opponent's board through, even though you're giving their creatures back, you're then re-triggering the Tithing Blades and the Nowhere to Runs and the Prophetic Prisms to draw cards, and the Talisman. I thought this was an interesting one. So because it comes back into play under your control, not your opponent's, so you can use this to go be a very cheap tutor. And then Temporary Lockdown, bounce the Temporary Lockdown, returns it back to you. So really kind of like, I haven't seen this deck before. It's a very unique take. We've got Rest in Peace for some of the Graveyard Reanimator strategies. Clay-Fired Bricks for the fetching a land and gaining 2 life. Also gives you kind of a win condition later, where you can then bounce your craft with your artifact. But the Hopeless Nightmare is a way to burn them out just by repeatedly bouncing that one over and over. The Thunder Trap Trainer gives us interesting dig every time that it enters, revealing the top 4 of your library. And you've got the Scroll Shift to bounce one of the bounce the temporary lockdown and have it come back instead of having to like do the Nurturing Pixie or that this town ain't big enough. And there is no loop in this one for replaying your This Town Ain't Big Enough over and over, which could be an interesting one to include the Storm Chaser's talent, but apparently wasn't necessary. The third one is Boros Tokens by Ernie Aran. Went 31 and 16, so it's 3 matches short of 50. But if we count all remaining matches as losses, they're still going to be above a 60% win rate. So 66%, and I believe this was a list by Covert Go Blue. I mean, there's a lot of variations of the red-white tokens build. This one taking more of a control approach, running the Brotherhood's End and the Sunfall. We've seen this one around actually for quite some time with the Urbrask's Forge plus the Caretaker's talent. And, you know, it's a good best of 1 strategy because this strategy can shut down pretty hard in best of 3 to cards like the Authority of the Consuls. Season of the Burrow gives us a little bit of either further control or being able to return a invincible forge or something like that. You've got the flanker for Graveyard Hate, and then we've got a lot of instant speed interaction with Lightning Helix, Abrade, Get Lost, and Torch the Tower. So if they shut down the Urbrask's Forge, you have a little bit of a problem, right? Because then you have to lean on like your manlands to win the game. But Caretaker's Talent and Season of the Burrow can be enough to be an alternative to winning them out with the Urbrask's Forge. But yeah, this combo has been pretty fun, and maybe there's less. At one point in time, this deck was very popular, and then it kind of dipped out because there was a lot of enchantment and artifact hate that came in that made it worse. And then, of course, running this many sweepers is going to make it worse against a non-creature strategy. Fourth here is Jund Prowess by Gibless, and we'll probably be talking about Gruul aggro in some form, at least in best of 3, tomorrow when I go over week 11 on my best of 1, best of 3 meta review. This one, basically, adding in the Callous Sellsword like we see in Mardu aggro or Rakdos aggro, being able to give you that fling. You do not need the black mana to actually play the Callous Sellsword, you just do the fling side of it. So running the Slickshot show-off version of the Gruul aggro, sometimes we do actually see this happen in best of 3 too. Usually with the Leyline though, because in best of 3 the Leyline, the red Leyline isn't banned. But either way, you're looking for a 1-turn kill off of your Heartfire Hero or your Slickshot show-off, and then Giant Growth gives you the double lightning bolt effect if you're flinging it, and then the Snakeskin Veil can protect your guy from the single point interaction. Yeah, and that previous deck went 63 and 27 for a 70% win rate. So this one's Orzhov Lifegain by Tyrell, and went 90 and 47 for a 66% win rate. And we've talked about this one throughout the weeks as well. This one leaning more heavily into the Dewdrop cure instead of multiple copies of Raise the Past, which I thought was an interesting approach. But you're still using the Surveil off of Snarling Gorehound and the Explorer off of Amalia to get cards into your graveyard to then bring them back in kind of one burst, which then triggers the enter the battlefield of the Hinterland Sanctifier and the Ellis Core. And then if you have a Starscape Cleric in play, then your opponent loses 1 life for each time you get one of those triggers off of Life Creep Duo as well. And then Essence Channeler is growing every time that you're gaining life. And then the Deep Cavern Bat and the Rune Lurker Bat both have lifelink, so they can trigger the gaining life triggers in this deck as well. And we have Rakdos Reanimator, sometimes called 5-color Reanimator to denote that it is actually a red strategy that's trying to bring back the Atraxa Grand Unifier. This one was by Myrick. It went 96 and 51 for a 65% win rate. And yeah, you're basically, you're trying to reanimate a Valgavoth, Atraxa. Coma is the one that I haven't seen very much. But yeah, you're trying to get it into your graveyard through effects like the Bitter Reunion, being able to discard it, Fear of Missing Out, as well as the Bitter Triumph. And then you're bringing it back with the Zombify. And the Cruelty of Gix is another way to reanimate. So we've got 6 total reanimators. We've got Go for the Throat and Cut Down for removal, the Brotherhood's End, as well as the Elder Dragon War. And the Elder Dragon War is one that we don't see very often, over like just 2 more copies of the Brotherhood's End. But the upside of that is that you have more discard, being able to get your targets into the graveyard. And then the 4/4 flyer is not like, it's just like icing on top. Next up is Azorius Convoke by Thrus 666. Went 75 and 38 for a 66% win rate. And I've been bumping into this one more on the Mythic side of things, on the Mythic ladder. You also have like the Novice Inspector, and then you think it's Jeskai Convoke. So it's like it's closer to the Jeskai Convoke list, but is running the Enduring Curiosity and the Flood Pit's Drowner. And so you've got this kind of go wide strategy that we see, to try to get the Gleeful Demolition into the Knight Errant of Eos and then the Imidane's Recruiter. And so since we're ditching the red, we don't have the Gleeful Demolition, but we still have the artifact creators of the Novice Inspector and the Spyglass Siren to make the Regal Bunnycorn bigger. And then it's probably your best target to hit with the Sheltered by Ghosts, because Sheltered by Ghosts is better on a target that's going to grow into a sizable threat, especially against mono red. Where you can get out, if you can get the toughness high enough, then you get outside of the range of like the forecasted lightning bolt or lightning strike, where they can pay the ward. So it's really good if you can get it at toughness 4. And then even above that for the Witchstalker's Frenzy. Sanguine Evangelist also gives us kind of a go wide. There's no Resolute Reinforcements in this deck. So the Knight Errant of Eos feels a little bit weaker than it does in your typical like Jeskai Convoke build, but your card draw feels significantly better off of Enduring Innocence and Enduring Curiosity. You also have the tap and create the 1/1s, which can give you the card draw as well as the card draw from getting the evasive damage through. And so I haven't personally played this one, but I played against it, and it seems like an interesting strategy. And we'll also talk about Jeskai Convoke. Sometimes this does make it into the top 8 in the best of 1 meta review, and I like to include the ones that are like sometimes not, sometimes are, just so that you are aware of the strategy that, there's lots of decks in tier 2 that are quite viable. So Jeskai Convoke by M. Wernick went in 39 and 23 for a 63% win rate. And this is the one that I was talking about where you play the Spyglass Siren so that you can Gleeful Demolition to try to get the Knight Errant of Eos to convoke into the Imidane's Recruiter. It's kind of the core strategy of the deck. And then this one's running Mockingbird, which we see in some lists and not in others. This one's only running 2 Case of the Gateway Express, and instead is leaning towards the Painter's Studio. And we've seen this one as an alternative, because the defaced gallery allows you to get the +1/+0 without having to solve the Case of the Gateway Express, which can give it to you immediately instead of the turn after, but then is also not playing as removal. And then we have Sheltered by Ghosts, which we've seen kind of explored up to 4 copies because this strategy can struggle against mono red. And the Sheltered by Ghosts then can help out with that matchup. And then you've also got the 2 copies of Torch the Tower to give you some instant speed interaction. And this, having this sort of option is nice against cards like the Azorius Omniscience deck that's going to, on turn 4, bring back the 1/1 creature. And sometimes you can zap that 1/1 creature before they play a counterspell, or if they don't have a counterspell or another copy of Omniscience, you can kind of stop their loop, right? So I've seen a trend of having more single point interaction, not just for mono red, but for other matchups as well. And then the last one that we're going to copy, or that we're going to cover today, is Mono Black Midrange by Arax. And they went 30 and 20 for a 60% win rate. So spot on the criteria, right where you need to be. So Mono Black Midrange, typically hanging out in tier 2, sometimes popping up into the top 8 in my meta reviews. And this one looks like a pretty standard list that we've covered before. But just in case you're new, Cut Down, Go for the Throat, Nowhere to Run, Shieldred's Edict, and Anoint with Affliction gives this deck a ton of single point interaction. So you're going to be good against the mono black deck, or mono red deck. You're not going to be as good against Celestia Rabbits or Jeskai Convoke, anything that's creating multiple cards with one, right? The multiple rectangles with one card. can be problematic for a deck that's trying to answer everything one for one, because you don't have a sweeper. You're not running the 5-costed Wrath. So, but you do have a 1-turn kill of Unstoppable Slasher with the Bloodletter of Aklazotz, and then you have demon synergies off of the Soulstone Sanctuary, the Archfiend, and the Bloodletter that work well with your Unholy Annex. And then Unholy Annex can create a 6/6 demon as well, pinging your opponent for 2, and then gaining you life, like giving you a shielded effect basically, and card draw has been fantastic. And this is one of the better cards in the archetype. Deep Cavern Bat then also gives you some hand disruption while also giving you some lifelink, which can be relevant in some matchups where you need, like, every point of life counts. And then Liliana of the Veil also fits into the attacking your opponent's creatures, but also being able to attack your hand. So if you're coming up against more of a control build, this deck can struggle. If all of these cards are whiffs because they don't have creatures, it can be an uphill battle. But Duress and Liliana of the Veil allow you to disrupt your control player and try to get into a turn 3 Slasher or Annex is kind of priority number 1. So, hope you enjoyed the Week 10 Meta Breakers. And tomorrow I'll be talking about the Week 11 Best of 3, Best of 1 Meta Review. And we'll be getting close to this Friday. I'll be doing my pre-release guide to the Aether Drift. I think that's coming up. I usually do it the weekend before pre-release. So pre-release is so this Friday should be getting the Aether Drift done. And I glanced over it a little bit. I haven't seen anything that just absolutely wowed me for standard constructed play, but there's always going to be something, right? The Aether Spark looked particularly interesting. And with that, though, hope you all have a good week. Good luck climbing the ladder and crushing the RCQ. And again, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to leave them below. I do my best to reply to each comment. So take care.